The night my own sister tried to erase my entire existence. She had no idea I could end her fantasy with a single sentence. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam a glass. I just told the truth. And the silence that followed? That was louder than anything she had ever said about me. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was realizing she had been rewriting my life for years. And I had let her. My name is Evelyn Harper. For most of my adult life I've sat behind a bench in a courtroom, listening to lies unravel thread by thread. I've watched men in $1,000 suits crumble under a single question. I've seen families fracture over greed. I've handed down sentences that changed the course of lives. You'd think that would make me immune to cruelty. It doesn't. Especially not when it comes wrapped in silk, and calls you big sis. The engagement party was exactly the kind of event my sister adored. Crystal chandeliers. String quartet humming in the corner. Waiters gliding across polished marble like they were rehearsed. Every guest looked curated. Perfect smiles. Perfect posture. Perfect illusion. And then there was me. Standing at the entrance in a simple black dress. Tailored. Elegant. Intentional. I'm always 5 minutes early. Never more. Never less. As I stepped inside, my heels clicked softly against the floor. No one turned. No one announced me. Good. I prefer entrances that don't require applause. But she saw me. Of course she did. Lillian. My younger sister tilted her head slightly, lips curving into a smile that looked warm from across the room, but up close? It said you weren't supposed to come. She leaned toward her fiancé's sister and whispered something. 3 pairs of eyes slid toward me. Curious. Amused. Dismissive. I didn't flinch. I've stared down defendants who thought they were untouchable. But something about standing there, in that glittering room filled with strangers who knew her version of me, felt different. Because the worst betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from people who know exactly where to aim. Growing up with Lillian meant learning how to shrink. She was the charming one. The magnetic one. The girl who could cry on command and somehow make teachers apologize to her. Our parents adored her. She just has such a way with people, my mother used to say. What she meant was, she knows how to manipulate a room. Meanwhile, I was the serious one. Too intense. Too quiet. Too rigid. If Lillian broke a rule, it was adorable. If I corrected a lie, I was dramatic. By high school, she had turned me into a punchline. She's basically married to her textbooks, she'd tell her friends. She'll probably die alone with a stack of law books. Everyone would laugh. Even at the dinner table. I remember once saying, I want to go to law school. My father didn't even look up from his plate. Lillian smirked. So you can boss people around legally? They laughed again. I stopped talking after that. And I started building. While she chased popularity, I chased discipline. While she collected admirers, I collected degrees. I graduated early. Got into one of the top law programs in the state. No balloons. No celebration dinner. Just a quiet, that's nice from my mother. But I didn't need applause. I needed power. And I earned it. Clerkship. Prosecutor. Case after case. White-collar criminals. Corruption. Fraud. Men twice my age called me ma'am with tight jaws. At 38, I was appointed to the Superior Court bench. Youngest in my district. The headline ran in the Metro section. My photo, robe folded over my arm, stared back at me from the front page. I mailed a copy home. No one called. I thought it would hurt. It didn't. By then I understood something important. Silence isn't always rejection. Sometimes it's peace. So when the ivory invitation arrived, embossed, scented, dramatic, I almost laughed. Join us in celebrating the engagement of Lillian Harper and Daniel Whitmore. No handwritten note. No warmth. Just obligation. Then the text came. Hey sis. No pressure to come if you're busy. Daniel's family is very high profile. Try not to wear anything too severe. Too severe. I stared at that message for a long time. She had no idea how severe I could be. She had no idea how many lives had shifted when I spoke a single sentence. But that's the thing. She never asked. And that's why I went. Not for her. Not for our parents. I went for something else. Closure. Or maybe, confrontation. I wasn't sure yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't walking into that room to shrink. Back at the party, I kept to the edges, champagne in hand, observing. Lillian floated from guest to guest like she owned gravity. Daniel, tall, polished, political, laughed on cue beside her. At one point I overheard someone ask him, "Does she have any siblings?" He shrugged casually. "She does. But they're not close." I felt that. But I didn't react. That was their narrative. I was the distant one. The cold one. The overly serious sister who never quite made it. I let them have their version. Because I knew something they didn't. And what happened next changed everything. I thought that was the extent of it. A few dismissive comments. A casual erasure. I was wrong. Because Lillian wasn't just ignoring me. She was building toward something. And I didn't realize it, until she picked up a fork and tapped it against her champagne glass. The soft cling-cling sliced through the music. The room quieted instantly. That's when I felt it. That subtle shift in energy. Like a courtroom right before a verdict. She stepped into the center of the room, spotlight catching the shimmer of her champagne-colored dress. Daniel wrapped an arm around her waist, proud. Confident. Oblivious. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, voice sweet and polished. "This means everything to us." Smiles. Applause. Phones lifted. He soaked it in. "I know I can be a little dramatic," she laughed. "But I wasn't always this put together." Light chuckles from the crowd. And then, "In fact," she continued, "growing up I was the wild one. My sister, Elena." She paused just long enough to make sure everyone was listening. "Was the opposite." A few guests turned their heads, searching for me. I didn't move. She was very strict. Very, by the book. Soft laughter. She once wrote me a formal note because I borrowed her sweater without asking. We were 13. The laughter grew louder. Someone actually clapped. I felt heat rise in my chest. Not embarrassment. Recognition. I'd seen this tactic before. Control the narrative. Define the other person before they speak. Make the room laugh at them so they never feel powerful. Classic misdirection. But she wasn't finished. "She's always been intense," Lillian continued. "Very serious. Not exactly the party type." More laughter. Daniel leaned toward the microphone. "But hey, we're glad she made it out of the courthouse tonight." The crowd chuckled again. I noticed something then. Not everyone was laughing. A few faces looked confused. Curious. Because here's the thing about public lies. They only work if no one questions them. And I had just started noticing the cracks. Lillian glanced toward me again. "Actually," she said lightly, "I wasn't sure she'd come. She works in, what is it again? Government paperwork." A ripple of amused murmurs. Daniel snapped his fingers playfully. "Right. Administrative something." He smiled at me from across the room like we were sharing a harmless joke. "That sounds important though," he added. "Important paperwork." I nearly laughed. The woman who had sentenced corporate executives to prison. Reduced to paperwork. But I didn't speak. Not yet. Because timing is everything. And she was digging her own hole deeper with every word. "She's always preferred files to people," Lillian continued. "We're just built differently." She gave a soft shrug. That was the part that stung. Not the lie. The framing. Like I was defective. Like choosing discipline over drama was some kind of flaw. I looked around the room. Expensive watches. Designer gowns. Carefully curated reputations. And suddenly it hit me. They weren't laughing because I was small. They were laughing because she told them I was. And when people believe a story long enough, they stop looking for proof. That's when I realized something else. I had allowed this. For years. By staying silent. By choosing dignity over defense. But silence only works when the other person has integrity. And Lillian? She had none tonight. She raised her glass. "To new beginnings," she said brightly. "And to family, however complicated." A few guests glanced back at me again. This time with curiosity. That was new. And I saw it. A subtle flicker in Daniel's expression. Doubt. Just for a second. He was calculating. Because here's what men like Daniel understand. Status. And something about this didn't add up. If I was so insignificant, why did I carry myself like I wasn't? Why wasn't I flustered? Why wasn't I defending myself? That quiet confidence? It unsettles people. I could see it happening in real time. And that's when Daniel made a mistake. He walked toward me. Microphone still in hand. Smile still polished. "Why don't you say a few words, Elena?" he asked smoothly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lillian stiffened. Just slightly. "Oh, she doesn't do speeches," she interjected quickly. Daniel chuckled. "Come on. We'd love to hear what government life is like." There was again. That assumption. That small box they'd prepared for me. And here's the thing. If I had stood up angry, they would have won. If I had corrected them defensively, they would have painted me bitter. But I've spent 20 years controlling courtrooms. I know how to command a room without raising my voice. I set my glass down. Fully. Every movement deliberate. The music had stopped completely now. You could hear the faint hum of the chandelier above us. I stood. And I felt it. That shift. Pain. Real attention. Not mockery. Not dismissal. Curiosity. And that is power. I walked toward them. Heel by heel. Lillian's smile tightened. Daniel handed me the microphone. Up close he looked confident. But his eyes. Searching. Good. Let them search. Because what I was about to say wasn't dramatic. Wasn't loud. But it was going to change the temperature of that entire room. And they had no idea. The microphone felt light in my hand. Funny how something so small can shift an entire room. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch. In court, silence is a tool. People rush to fill it. They reveal themselves in the gaps. Lillian shifted beside me. Daniel cleared his throat softly. Someone near the back whispered, "This should be interesting." Yes, it would be. I gave them a small, polite smile. "Thank you, Daniel," I said calmly. "I'll keep this brief." A few relieved chuckles. They were expecting awkwardness. Maybe a stiff joke. Maybe confirmation that I was exactly what Lillian described. Instead, I looked directly at him. "You mentioned I work in government administration." He nodded, still smiling. "That's what I understood." "And you heard that from?" His smile faltered just slightly. "Lillian said you were in public service." I turned to her. She held her posture perfectly. Chin lifted. Smile controlled. "Yes," she said lightly. "Public sector. Paperwork, right?" There was again. Paperwork. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Clarity. I turned back to the crowd. "I don't work in administration," I said evenly. The room quieted further. "I don't file records." Pause. "I interpret them." A few confused glances passed between guests. Daniel's brows pulled together. Lillian's fingers tightened around her champagne stem. And then I said it. "I'm a presiding judge in the Superior Court." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Because the silence that followed was immediate. Heavy. Thick enough to taste. For a split second no one moved. Then I saw it. Recognition. A man near the front leaned forward. "Judge Moreno?" he asked carefully. I nodded once. The reaction was subtle at first. Then it spread. "Oh my God. Wait, Eastbrook case? She handled that corruption trial, didn't she?" Phones came out. Quick searches under the table. Whispers rising like wind through leaves. Daniel's expression shifted completely. The easy charm vanished. Is that Judge Moreno?" he asked quietly. "Yes." He blinked. "But Lillian said you left law." "That you?" "I never left," I replied. I didn't look at her when I said it. I didn't need to. Because I could feel her unraveling beside me. A woman in emerald near the bar spoke up. "You were the youngest appointee in the district, weren't you?" "Yes." "And that sentencing last year, it made national news." "Yes." Each answer calm. Measured. Undeniable. Daniel slowly removed his arm from around Lillian's waist. That's when I knew. This wasn't about embarrassment anymore. This was about deception. And he had just realized something important. He lied about me. What else had she edited? Lillian laughed suddenly. Too loudly. "Oh please," she said. "She's exaggerating. You know how she is." But the problem with lies? They collapse under detail. And details were everywhere now. One guest turned his phone toward Daniel. There I was. Courtroom photo. Robe. Nameplate. Verified. Not paperwork. Power. The room felt different now. No longer indulgent. Analytical. The way people look at a witness whose testimony just shifted. I set the microphone slightly lower. People assume quiet means small, I said softly. It doesn't. No one laughed this time. They assume if you don't advertise your life, it must not be significant. A few guests nodded slowly. Lillian's smile was gone. Completely. Daniel looked between us. You told me she didn't pass the bar, he said under his breath. And there was the real fracture. She hadn't minimized me. She had rewritten me. I met his gaze. I passed on the first attempt, I said evenly. A ripple of murmurs. Lillian stepped closer to him. Daniel, don't make this dramatic, she whispered urgently. But he wasn't listening to her anymore. He was looking at me. Really looking. And that's when I realized, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the invisible one in that room. She was. I handed the microphone back to him. When people don't ask questions, I said quietly, they shouldn't be surprised by the answers. No sarcasm. No anger. Just truth. I stepped away. But I didn't leave. Not yet. Because something was happening. Something bigger than humiliation. Daniel turned to Lillian. Why would you lie about that? He asked, low but sharp. He forced a laugh. I didn't lie. I just simplified. Simplified, he repeated. The word tasted bitter in the air. Guests were pretending not to stare. But they were staring. Our parents stood frozen near the back. My mother's hand hovered near her necklace. The one I'd sent years ago. Unacknowledged. Now suddenly heavy against her skin. I thought it would end there. A correction. A shift. I was wrong. Because Daniel wasn't done asking questions. And Lillian? She wasn't prepared for cross-examination. And what happened next? Changed everything. I should have left. I could have walked out right then, quiet, dignified, victorious. But something in Daniel's expression stopped me. It wasn't embarrassment. It was calculation. And when a calculating man realizes he's been misled, he doesn't let it go. I need a minute, he said, not to me, to Lillian. His voice had lost its polish. The room felt colder somehow. Guests tried to resume conversations, but no one was really talking. They were listening. Watching. Waiting. Lillian forced a tight smile. Baby, not here. Then where? He asked quietly. That's when I saw it. Fear. Not dramatic panic. Not tears. Just that small crack in composure when someone realizes the narrative has slipped from their control. And I recognized it instantly. I've seen that exact look on defendants when evidence gets introduced they didn't expect. I stepped back toward the edge of the room, giving them space. But I didn't leave. Because I knew something. When a lie is exposed publicly, the truth doesn't stop at one layer. It digs. Daniel looked back at me. How long have you been on the bench? He asked. 7 years. And before that? Federal prosecutor. A few audible gasps. Someone muttered, "You're kidding." Lillian's jaw tightened. That's not relevant, she snapped. But it was. It was very relevant. Because suddenly the room wasn't seeing me as the awkward older sister. They were recalculating. And Daniel? He was reevaluating everything. You told me she barely practiced, he said to Lillian. She exaggerates everything, she shot back. I almost smiled at that. Exaggeration requires embellishment. I hadn't embellished a single thing. One of Daniel's relatives, older man, silver hair, expensive watch, stepped closer. Judge Moreno, he said respectfully, I followed the Eastbrook sentencing. That was a difficult call. Yes, I replied. And you handled it with remarkable balance. Thank you. The shift was undeniable now. Respect had entered the room. Real respect. The kind you don't beg for. The kind you earn. And Lillian? She was shrinking. I don't understand, Daniel said slowly. Why wouldn't you tell me this? She looked at him like he'd betrayed her. Because she makes everything about herself, she said. I didn't want tonight hijacked. Hijacked. I hadn't spoken for years. And yet somehow my existence was an inconvenience. Daniel shook his head. That's not hijacking. That's impressive. The word hung in the air. Impressive. Lillian hated that word. Because it wasn't about her. I could have twisted the knife then. I could have listed my cases. My rulings. My appointments. But revenge isn't volume. It's restraint. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't about correcting her story. It was about revealing her character. And she was doing that all by herself. You lied, Daniel said plainly. I didn't lie, she insisted. I just didn't think it mattered. It matters, he replied. Not loudly. Not theatrically. But firmly. People had stopped pretending now. They were openly watching. Our parents were inching closer. My mother looked pale. My father avoided my eyes entirely. That part almost made me laugh. They were shocked. Not because I was successful, but because they had no idea. And that was the real indictment. Lillian turned to me suddenly. You could have told me you were still doing that, she said, accusation dripping from every word. Still doing that. Like it was a hobby I never grew out of. I met her gaze calmly. You never asked. Simple. Plain. Unarguable. She blinked. For a second she looked small. And I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. What else have you simplified? He asked her quietly. That question landed heavier than anything I'd said. Now. This wasn't about me. This was about trust. And trust, once cracked in public, doesn't repair easily. I can't do this right now, Lillian whispered. But it was too late. The performance had ended. The audience had seen behind the curtain. And Daniel was no longer smiling. He turned to me one last time. I apologize, he said sincerely. For assuming. That's understandable, I replied. You were told a story. His jaw tightened. And then he looked back at her. You told me she failed the bar, he said. The room inhaled sharply. There was the full lie. Not minimization. Not omission. Fabrication. Lillian's composure cracked completely. I didn't think you'd like her, she burst out. You're always surrounded by powerful people. I didn't want to compete with my own sister. Silence. Raw. Unfiltered. And finally honest. I felt something shift inside me. Not triumph. Not anger. Relief. Because for the first time in our lives, she admitted it. It was never that I was too serious. Too rigid. Too distant. It was that I was a threat. And she couldn't control that. Daniel stepped back from her. I need air, he said. And he walked toward the terrace. Leaving her standing alone under the chandelier. No spotlight now. No applause. Just exposure. She looked around the room, desperate for allies. There were none. And that's when I realized. The real revenge wasn't announcing who I was. It was letting the truth stand still long enough for everyone to see it. But the night? It wasn't over yet. Because what happened outside on that terrace would change our family forever. I wasn't planning to follow him. That wasn't my role. I had already said what needed to be said. But when Daniel stepped out onto the terrace, shoulders tight, jaw clenched, something told me this wasn't finished. And I've learned to trust that instinct. It's the same one that tells me when a witness is about to break. The night air was cool when I pushed open the glass doors. Soft music still drifted from inside, but out here it felt distant, muted. Daniel stood near the railing, staring down at the city lights below. For a moment I considered turning back. Let them handle their mess. But then he spoke without looking at me. Did she really tell people you failed the bar? There it was again. Not disbelief. Not confusion. Betrayal. Yes, I said calmly. Apparently. He exhaled sharply. She told my parents you struggled. That you never quite found your footing. I almost laughed. Struggled. The irony was almost poetic. I found it, I replied quietly. Just not where she was looking. He finally turned toward me. There was no charm left in his face now. Just calculation, and something like embarrassment. I pride myself on reading people, he said. And I didn't see this. No, I said gently. You saw what you were shown. That's when Lillian burst through the doors. Her heels hit the stone terrace too fast, too sharp. Daniel, can we not do this outside? She snapped. He didn't soften. What else did you lie about? She froze. And in that pause, I saw the truth. This wasn't the first edited story. It was just the first one exposed. Why are you making this bigger than it is? She demanded. Because it is big, he shot back. You lied about your own sister's career. She turned to me, eyes flashing. You enjoyed that, didn't you? I blinked. Enjoyed what? making me look small. The accusation almost stunned me. I corrected misinformation, I said evenly. You humiliated me. That word echoed. Humiliated. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I didn't say anything untrue. She shook her head. You could have told me you were appointed. You could have updated me. Updated her. As if I owed her press releases about my life. I sent announcements, I said quietly. You never responded. Daniel's head turned sharply toward her. You knew, he asked. She didn't answer. Which was answer enough. And that's when something clicked. This wasn't insecurity born tonight. This had been festering for years. You always needed to win, she said to me suddenly. Even as a kid. When? I almost smiled. I studied, I replied. That's not a competition. It is when you make everyone else feel inferior. I stared at her. For the first time in my life I really looked at my sister. Not the charming version. Not the golden child. Just the woman standing in front of me. Terrified of comparison. You made that comparison, I said softly. Not me. Daniel stepped back slightly. Watching us like he'd stepped into a courtroom drama he didn't audition for. Maybe he had. Because what he was seeing now was evidence. Years of it. You told me she resented you, he said to Lillian. He swallowed. She does. I felt that one. Not because it was true, but because part of me once had. When I was 16. When I was invisible. When every accomplishment felt like it happened in a vacuum. But resentment requires emotional investment. And somewhere along the way, I stopped investing. I don't resent you, I said quietly. She blinked. You don't. No. That seemed to hit her harder than anything else. Because resentment would have meant I still cared enough to compete. But indifference is final. Daniel rubbed his temples. I can't build a life on edited truths, he said slowly. The air shifted. This wasn't just about embarrassment anymore. This was about foundation. Trust. Integrity. The things that matter when the music stops. You're overreacting, she insisted. Am I? He asked calmly. Neither of them noticed the doors behind us opening again. Our parents stepped onto the terrace. My mother looked shaken. My father, guilty. And suddenly this wasn't just a fiancé issue. It was a family reckoning. Evelyn, my mother said softly. It had been years since she'd said my name like that. Not clipped. Not distracted. Just present. I didn't know, she added. I believed her. That was the strange part. They hadn't ignored my success out of cruelty. They had ignored it because Lillian never let it take space. She said you didn't want attention, my father murmured. I almost laughed again. Attention was never the point. Respect was. Lillian looked around at all of us. Cornered. Not by accusation, but by truth. I didn't want to compete, she whispered finally. There was the confession. Small. Honest. Human. And for a brief second, I felt something soften. But then she added, I didn't think you'd overshadow me like this. And just like that, the softness vanished. Because I hadn't overshadowed her. She had dimmed me. And what happened next wasn't revenge. It was consequence. I didn't think you'd overshadow me like this. That's what she said. Like my existence was a spotlight she couldn't turn off. I looked at her for a long moment. Really looked at her. And I realized something I hadn't understood as a child. She wasn't stronger than me. She was louder. There's a difference. I didn't come here to overshadow you, I said quietly. I came because you invited me. Her laugh was brittle. You came to prove a point. No, I replied. You proved it for me. Daniel didn't interrupt. He just watched her. Studied her. The way I study witnesses when they don't realize they're contradicting themselves. You told me she failed, he repeated slowly. I thought she might. Lillian snapped. But she didn't. Silence. That heavy, suffocating silence. The kind that forces people to face what they've said. My mother stepped closer. Why would you say that? She asked Lillian, her voice trembling. For once, Lillian said, tears finally forming, I wanted to be the impressive one. There was the real motive. Not cruelty. Insecurity. But insecurity weaponized is still damage. You are impressive, my mother whispered. But even she sounded unsure. Because tonight had revealed something uncomfortable. Impressiveness built on distortion isn't stable. Daniel inhaled slowly. I need honesty, he said. Especially about family. Family. That word used to feel heavy to me. Like obligation. Tonight it felt like a mirror. Reflecting everything we'd avoided for years. You're really questioning us over this? Lillian asked, disbelief creeping into her tone. This, he replied. No. I'm questioning you because if you can lie about something this big, what else are you capable of editing? She had no answer. And that was answer enough. I felt oddly calm. There was no surge of triumph. No rush of revenge. Just clarity. The truth had done its work. I didn't need to add anything. But then my father spoke. And what he said surprised me. We should have known, he murmured. We. Not you. Not her. We. That word landed deeper than anything else tonight. Because it acknowledged something we'd all ignored. They hadn't asked about my life. They hadn't shown up. They hadn't called. They had accepted her version because it was easier. And ease is the enemy of understanding. Evelyn, my mother said again, tears in her eyes now. Why didn't you tell us? I could have listed the times I tried. The articles mailed. The invitations sent. The calls unanswered. But I didn't. Because I suddenly understood something else. Explaining yourself to people who aren't listening is exhausting. I stopped chasing acknowledgement, I said softly. It felt peaceful. That hurt them. I saw it. And strangely I didn't enjoy that either. Because revenge loses its flavor when empathy shows up. Daniel looked at me. I owe you an apology, he said sincerely. You don't, I replied. I do. I believed something about you without verification. That's human, I said. But marrying someone, he continued, turning to Lillian, requires more than curated stories. Curated. That word hit hard. Because that's what tonight had been. A curated performance. Until it wasn't. I can't do this right now, he said finally. The same words as before. But this time they meant something heavier. He walked past her. Not dramatically. Not angrily. Just decisively. The terrace doors closed behind him. And in that soft click, something ended. Lillian's shoulders slumped. For the first time in her life, there was no audience to charm. No narrative to spin. Just consequence. You're happy now? She whispered to me. I paused. That question deserved honesty. No, I said. She looked surprised. I'm not happy, I continued. I'm finished. That landed differently. Finished doesn't mean furious. It means complete. Our parents stood in silence. The weight of years settling around us. I should have paid attention, my father said quietly. Yes, I agreed. Not cruelly. Just truthfully. Because accountability isn't revenge. It's repair. People are willing to use it. Lillian wiped her tears angrily. You've always been so self-righteous. I almost smiled. I've always been consistent. There's a difference. I stepped toward the door. The party inside was awkward now. Muted. People pretending not to stare at the drama they'd witnessed. I didn't belong there. I never had. But I didn't feel small walking back through that room. I felt grounded. Guests moved slightly out of my way. Not dramatically. Subtly. Respect has a quiet presence. As I reached the exit, my mother called after me. Will you come to dinner next week? It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't a speech. It was an invitation. A beginning. I'll check my schedule, I said. And for the first time in years. She nodded like she understood that my time mattered. Outside the night air felt clean. Cool. Honest. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Thank you for your integrity. That was all. No drama. No flattery. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. I drove away without looking back. Not because I was angry. But because I didn't need to witness the aftermath. The truth had shifted the air. And once truth moves through a room, it never leaves things the same. But the real change wasn't in that party. It was in me. And what happened in the weeks after proved that silence, when chosen, not forced, is the most powerful statement of all. I thought that night would be the climax. The big reveal. The public correction. The dramatic ending. I was wrong. Because the real consequences didn't happen under chandeliers. They happened in silence. in the weeks that followed. And that's where everything truly changed. 3 days after the engagement party, the wedding website went offline. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. But that wasn't even the part that surprised me. What surprised me was my mother calling. Not texting. Calling. "I made your favorite," she said when I answered. No greeting. No small talk. Just that. Lemon rosemary chicken. The one she used to make when I had exams. "I remember," I replied. There was a pause. "I should have remembered more," she added quietly. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. And strangely, it was enough. Dinner that week felt different. Smaller. Quieter. My father asked about my docket. Not in a dismissive way. In a curious way. "How do you decide sentencing?" he asked. It wasn't about prestige. It wasn't about headlines. It was about the work. And for the first time in my life, they were listening. I didn't overperform. I didn't minimize. I simply answered. And something shifted. Not dramatically. Not magically. But genuinely. Lillian didn't come to that dinner. She didn't come the week after either. At first I assumed she was angry. Then embarrassed. Then maybe both. But then 2 weeks later, she showed up at my chambers. Unannounced. Which is ironic. Because most people schedule weeks in advance to see me. She stood in the doorway, hands clasped. No silk dress. No audience. Just her. "You're busy?" she asked softly. "Yes," I said honestly. "But I have 10 minutes. She nodded. And stepped inside. Seeing her in my world was surreal. The high ceilings. The law books. The seal behind my bench. She looked smaller there. Not because I wanted her to. But because she wasn't performing. "I didn't think you'd actually become this," she said quietly. I didn't answer. Because what does that even mean? "I always thought you'd burn out," she continued. "Or quit. Or not make it." There was no malice in her tone. Just confession. "That must have been comforting," I replied evenly. He swallowed. It was. Honesty again. Unexpected. Unfiltered. "I was scared of you," she admitted. That one surprised me. "Why?" "Because you didn't need anyone to validate you." That wasn't entirely true. There was a time I did. A long time. But I didn't correct her. Because what mattered wasn't my past need. It was her present realization. "I lied to Daniel because I thought he'd admire you more," she said. "And that threatened you." "Yes." Simple. Finally. No excuses. No theatrics. Just truth. And here's the thing about truth. When it's delivered without manipulation, it doesn't feel like a weapon. It feels like release. "I didn't come to compete," I told her. "I never was." "I know that now," she whispered. Silence settled between us. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was processing. "I don't know if the wedding is happening," she admitted. I studied her expression. For cracks. For performance. There weren't any. "Do you want it to?" I asked. She hesitated. "I don't know." That might have been the most honest thing she'd ever said. Because for once she wasn't answering based on image. She was answering based on uncertainty. Growth starts there. In discomfort. Before she left, she paused at the door. "You didn't humiliate me," she said quietly. I waited. "I did that myself." Yes. She did. And hearing her say it, that mattered. More than applause. More than public validation. Because revenge isn't destruction. It's revelation. And revelation had done its job. Months passed. The engagement ended officially. Quietly. No dramatic announcement. Just a change in relationship status and a returned ring. Daniel sent me one final message. "You handled that night with more grace than I deserved. Thank you." I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness. But because closure doesn't always require dialogue. Lillian started therapy. My mother told me that in a whisper, like it was fragile. Good. Reflection requires guidance. And for the first time I didn't feel responsible for managing her emotions. Or shrinking mine. I simply lived. Here's what I learned. The night of the party wasn't about exposing my title. It wasn't about status. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about refusing to let someone else define my narrative. Silence can be powerful. But only when it's chosen. not imposed. For years I was silent because it was easier. Because correcting her felt exhausting. Because I believed dignity meant endurance. But dignity without boundaries is just self-erasure. And I was done erasing myself. People think the most satisfying revenge is loud, public, explosive. It's not. The most satisfying revenge is standing calmly in your truth while someone else's lies collapse under their own weight. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to attack. I simply answered a question honestly. And that honesty shifted everything. Today when I sit behind that bench and look out over my courtroom, I don't think about that party with anger. I think about it with clarity. Because that night, under those glittering lights, I stopped being the quiet sister in the corner. Not because I changed, but because I stopped allowing myself to be minimized. And here's the part that matters most. I didn't win. I didn't conquer. I didn't destroy. I was simply seen. And sometimes, that's the most powerful verdict of all.